One night, Henry and Gordon were alone with James. Although the Fat Controller was beginning to think well of him, whenever a chance came, the other engines would talk of nothing but bootlaces. "Remember the time one had to be used to get you out of trouble, James," they would tease. James tried to get his own back, talking about engines who got shut up in tunnels and stuck on hills. But they wouldn't listen. "You talk too much, little James," said Gordon. "A fine, strong engine like me has something to talk about. I'm the only engine who can pull the express. When I'm not there, they need two engines. Think of that. I've pulled expresses for years and have never once lost my way. I seem to know the right line by instinct." Every wise engine knows, of course, that the signalman works the points to make engines run on the right lines, but Gordon was so proud he had forgotten. "Wake up, James," said Gordon next morning. "It's nearly time for the express." "What are you doing? Odd jobs?" "Oh, well, we all have to begin somewhere, don't we? Run along now and get my coaches. Don't be late." James went to get Gordon's coaches. They were all shining with lovely new paint. He was careful not to bump them, and they followed him smoothly into the station, singing happily, "We're going away, we're going away." "I wish I was going with you," said James. "I should love to pull the express and go flying along the line." Gordon, with much noise and blowing of steam, got ready to back onto the train. The Fat Controller was on the train with other important people, and as soon as they heard the guard's whistle, Gordon started. Look at me now," he puffed, and the coaches glided after him. "Poop, poop, 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 poop. Goodbye, little James. See you tomorrow." James watched the train disappear and then went back to work. He pushed some trucks into their proper sidings and went to fetch the coaches for another train. James had just brought the coaches to the platform when he heard a mournful noise. There was Gordon trying to sidle into the station without being noticed. "Hello, Gordon. Is it tomorrow?" asked James. Gordon didn't answer. He just let off steam feebly. "Did you lose your way, Gordon?" said James. "No, it was lost for me. I was switched off the main line onto the loop. I had to go all round and back again." "Perhaps it was instinct," said James. Meanwhile, all the passengers hurried to the booking office. "We want our money back," they shouted. But the Fat Controller climbed on a trolley and blew the guard's whistle, so loudly that they all stopped to look at him. Then he promised them a new train at once. "Gordon can't do it," he said. "Will you pull it for us, James?" "Yes, sir, I'll try." So James was coupled on and everyone got in. "Do your best, James," said the Fat Controller.
Good shot, man.
Come along, puffed James. You're pulling as well, sang the coaches. Bridges and stations flashed by, the passengers cheered, and they soon reached the station. Everyone said thank you to James, and the Fat Controller was very impressed. "Well done," he said. "Would you like to pull the express sometime?" "Yes, please," answered James. Next day, when James came by, Gordon was pushing trucks. "I like some quiet work for a change," he said. "I'm teaching these trucks manners. You did well with those coaches, I hear." "Good, we'll show them." And he gave his trucks a bump. James and Gordon are now good friends. James sometimes takes the express to give Gordon a rest. Gordon never talks about boot races, and they are both quite agreed on the subject of trucks. Thomas the Tank Engine is very proud of his branch line. He thinks it's the most important part of the whole railway. His two coaches, Annie and Clarabelle, agree with him. Annie can only take passengers, but Clarabelle can take passengers, luggage, and the guard. They are both old and need new paint, but Thomas loves them very much.
Yes! You just let's go. Let's go.
As they run backwards and forwards along the line, they sing songs to each other. When Thomas starts from a station, he sings, "Oh, come along, we're rather late. Oh, come along, we're rather late." And the coaches sing, "We're coming along, we're coming along." They don't mind what Thomas says to them, because they know he is trying to please the Fat Controller. And they know, too, that if Thomas is cross, he's not cross with them. One day they had to wait for Henry's train, which made Thomas very cross. How can I run my line properly if Henry is always late? He doesn't realize that the Fat Controller depends on me. Thomas whistled impatiently. He wanted to leave, but he had to wait for Henry's passengers. At last, Henry came.
Hey, thanks. Go, go, go! This sucks on ice.
"Where have you been, lazy bones?" asked Thomas. "Oh dear, my system is out of order. No one understands my case. You don't know what I suffer," moaned Henry. "Rubbish," said Thomas. "You're too fat. You need exercise."
Sweet.
The guard blew his whistle, and Thomas started so quickly that he left him behind.
Unbelievable.
The guard waved his red flag to stop Thomas, but he was well on his way, steaming out of the station.
We got a spy.
Come along, puffed Thomas. But Clarabelle didn't want to come. "I've lost my nice guard. I've lost my nice guard," she sobbed. Annie tried to tell Thomas what had happened. "We haven't a guard. We haven't a guard." But he was hurrying and wouldn't listen. Annie and Clarabelle tried to put on their brakes, but they couldn't without the guard. "Where is our guard? Where is our guard?" they cried. But Thomas didn't stop till they came to a signal. "Bother that signal," said Thomas. "What's the matter?" "I don't know," said his driver. "The guard will tell us in a minute." They waited and waited, but the guard didn't come. "Peep, peep, peep, peep." "Where is the guard?" whistled Thomas. "We've left him behind," sobbed Annie and Clarabelle together. Everyone looked, and there was the guard running as fast as he could along the line, with his flags in one hand and his whistle in the other. He was very hot, so he had a drink, then told them all about it. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Guard," said Thomas. "It wasn't your fault, Thomas," he replied. "Look, the signal is down. We can go. Let's make up for lost time." Annie and Clarabelle were so pleased to have their guard again that they sang, "As fast as you like, as fast as you like," to Thomas all the way. They reached the end of the line quicker than ever before.
Wicked. Stupid, stupid, stupid.
When Thomas puffed along his branch line, he always looked forward to something special. The sight of the river.
We got it, we got it.
As he rumbled over the bridge, he would see people fishing. Thomas often wanted to stay and watch, but his driver said no. What would the Fat Controller say if we were late? Every time he met another engine, he would say, "I want to fish." But they all had the same answer. "Engines don't go fishing." Silly stick in the muds, thought Thomas. One day he stopped as usual to take in water at the station by the river. "Out of order." "Bother," said Thomas. "I'm thirsty." "Never mind," said his driver. "We'll get some water from the river." found a bucket and some rope and went to the bridge. Then the driver let the bucket down to the water. The bucket was old and had 5 holes. So they had to fill it, pull it up, and empty it into Thomas's tank as quickly as they could, several times over.
Nice shot.
They finished at last. That's good, puffed Thomas, and Annie and Clarabelle ran happily behind. Suddenly, Thomas began to feel a pain in his boiler. Steam began to hiss from his safety valve in an alarming way. There's too much steam, said his driver. Oh dear, groaned Thomas. I'm going to burst. I'm going to burst. They damped down his fire and struggled on. I've got such a pain. I've got such a pain, Thomas hissed. They stopped just outside the last station, uncoupled Annie and Clarabelle, and ran Thomas, who was still hissing fit to burst, on a siding right out of the way. Then while the guard telephoned for an engine inspector, the driver found notices in large letters, which he hung on Thomas in front and behind. Danger! Keep away! Soon the inspector and the Fat Controller arrived. Cheer up, Thomas, they said. We'll soon put you right. The driver told them what had happened. So the feed pipe is blocked, said the inspector. I'll just look in the tanks. He climbed up and peered in. Then he came down. Excuse me, sir. Please look in the tank and tell me what you see. Certainly, Inspector, replied the Fat Controller. He clambered up, looked in, and nearly fell off in surprise. Inspector, he whispered, can you see fish? Gracious goodness me, how did the fish get there, driver? We must have fished them from the river with our bucket, replied Thomas's driver. Well, Thomas, so you and your driver have been fishing, but fish don't suit you. We must get them out. They all took turns at fishing in Thomas's tank, while the Fat Controller looked on and told them how to do it. When they had caught all the fish, they had a lovely picnic supper of fish and chips. That was good, said the Fat Controller. But fish don't suit you, Thomas, so you mustn't do it again. No, sir, I won't, said Thomas sadly. Engines don't go fishing. It's too uncomfortable. Thomas was waiting at a junction when a bus arrived. Hello, said Thomas. Who are you? I'm Bertie. Who are you? I'm Thomas. I run this branch line. So you're Thomas, eh? I remember now. You got stuck in the snow. I took your passengers and Terence the tractor pulled you out. I've come to help you with your passengers today. Help me, said Thomas. I can go faster than you. You can't, said Bertie. I can, huffed Thomas. I'll race you, said Bertie. The drivers agreed to the race going ahead. The station master said, are you ready? Go. Thomas never could go fast at first, and Bertie drew in front. Why don't you go fast? Why don't you go fast? Called Annie and Clarabelle. Wait and see, hissed Thomas. He's a long way ahead, they wailed. But Thomas didn't mind. He'd remembered the level crossing. There was Bertie, fuming at the gates, while they sailed gaily through. Goodbye, Bertie, called Thomas. After that, the road left the railway, so they couldn't see Bertie. Then they had to stop at the station to let off passengers. Pip, pip, pip! Quickly, please, called Thomas. And off they went again. Come along, sang Thomas. We're coming along, sang Annie and Clarabel. Hurry, 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 panted Thomas. Then he looked ahead. There was Bertie tooting triumphantly on his horn. Oh, dearie me, groaned Thomas. Steady, Thomas, said his driver. We'll be Bertie yet. We'll be Bertie yet. We'll be Bertie yet, echoed Annie and Clarabel. We'll do it, panted Thomas. Oh, bother, there's a station. Then he heard Bertie. Goodbye, Thomas. You must be tired. Sorry I can't stop. We buses have to work, you know. Goodbye. Oh dear, thought Thomas. We've lost. But he felt better after a drink. The signal dropped. Hurrah, we're off! Hurrah, we're off! Puffed Thomas. As they crossed the bridge, they heard an impatient honk, honk. There was Bertie waiting at the traffic lights. He started with a roar and chased on after Thomas again. Now Thomas reached his full speed. Bertie tried hard, but Thomas was too fast. Whistling triumphantly, he plunged into the tunnel, leaving Bertie toiling far behind. I've done it, panted Thomas. We've done it, hooray, we've done it, hooray, chanted Annie and Clarabel as they whooshed into the last station. Everyone was there to celebrate Thomas's victory, but they gave Bertie a big welcome too. Well done, Thomas, said Bertie, that was fun. But to beat you over that hill, I should have to grow wings and be an aeroplane.
Hey, thanks. Move it, lads! Get going!
They now keep each other very busy. They often talk about their race, but Bertie's passengers don't like being bounced like peas in a frying pan. And the Fat Controller has warned Thomas not to race at dangerous speeds. So although, between you and me, they would like to have another race, I don't think they ever will. Do you?
Medic!
Henry and Gordon were lonely when Thomas left the yard to run his branch line. They missed him very much. They had more work to do and had to fetch their own coaches. They didn't like that. James grumbled too. We get no rest, they all complained. But the coaches only laughed. You're lazy and slack, they answered. Altogether, the engines were causing the Fat Controller a great deal of trouble. The big stations at both ends of the line each have a turntable. The Fat Controller had made them so that the tender engines can be turned round, because it is dangerous for them to go fast backwards. Tank engines like Thomas don't need turntables. They can go just as well backwards as forwards. But to hear Gordon talk, you would have thought that the Fat Controller had given him a tender just to show how important he was. You don't understand, little Thomas. We tender engines have a position to keep up. It doesn't matter where you go, but we are important. And for the Fat Controller to make us shunt trucks, fetch coaches, and go on some of those dirty sidings, it's not the proper thing.
Hey, thanks.
Thomas chuckled and went off with Annie and Clarabel. Disgraceful, Gordon hissed as he ran backwards to the turntable. The turntable was in a windy place close to the sea, and if he was not on it just right, he put it out of balance and made it difficult to turn. Today, Gordon was in a bad temper, and the wind was blowing fiercely. His driver tried to make him stop in the right place, but Gordon wasn't trying. The fireman tried to turn the handle, but Gordon's weight and the strong wind prevented him. "It's no good," they said at last. "Your tender upsets the balance. If you were a nice tank engine, you'd be all right. Now you'll have to pull the next train backwards." "Look," called some boys, "there's a new tank engine." "Oh, it's only Gordon back to front." "Hello," called Thomas, "playing tank engines? Sensible engine. Take my advice, scrap your tender and have a nice bunker." Gordon said nothing. Even James laughed when he saw him. "Take care," hissed Gordon, "you might stick too." "No fear," chuckled James, "I'm not so fat as you." "I mustn't stick," thought James. He stopped on just the right place to balance the table. It could now swing easily. Gordon arrived in time to see everything. James turned much too easily. The wind puffed him round like a top. He couldn't stop. "Well, well," said Gordon, "are you playing roundabouts?" Poor James, feeling quite giddy, rolled off to the shed without a word. That night, the three engines had an indignation meeting. It's shameful to treat tender engines like this. Gordon has to go backwards and people think he's a tank engine. James spins round like a top and everyone laughs at us. And to add to that, the fat controller makes us all shunt in dirty sidings. Blech! "Listen," said Gordon. He whispered something to the others. "We'll do it tomorrow. The fat controller will look silly." The engines had decided to go on strike. The fat controller sat in his office listening to the noise outside. The passengers were angry.
Hey, Whip!
The station master came in. "There's trouble in the shed, sir. Henry is sulking, there's no train, and the passengers are saying this is a bad railway." "Indeed," said the fat controller, "we cannot allow that." He found Gordon, James, and Henry looking very cross. "Come along, Henry, it's time your train was ready." "Henry's not going," said Gordon. "We won't shunt like common tank engines. That was Thomas's job.
Yeah,
We are
thanks.
important tender engines. You fetch our coaches and we will pull them. Tender engines don't shunt." "Oh, indeed," said the fat controller. "We'll see about that. Engines on my railway do as they are told." And he hurried away to find Edward. The yard has never been the same since Thomas left to run his branch line, he thought sadly. Edward was shunting. "Leave those trucks, please, Edward," said the fat controller. "I want you to push coaches for me in the yard." "Thank you, sir. That will be a nice change." "That's a good engine. Off you go, then." So Edward found coaches for the three engines, and that day the trains ran as usual. But next morning, Edward looked unhappy. Gordon came clanking past, hissing rudely. "Bless me," said the fat controller, "what a noise." "They all hiss me, sir," answered Edward. "They say tender engines don't shunt, and last night they said I have black wheels. I haven't, have I, sir?" "No, Edward, you have nice blue ones, and I'm proud of you. Tender engines do shunt, but all the same, we do need another tank engine here." He went to a workshop and they showed him all sorts of engines. At last he saw a smart little green engine with 4 wheels. That's the one, he thought. If I choose you, will you work hard? Oh, sir, yes, sir. That's a good engine. I'll call you Percy. Yes, sir, thank you, sir, said Percy. The Fat Controller brought him back to the yard. Edward, he called, here's Percy. Will you show him everything? Percy soon learned what he had to do, and they had a happy afternoon. Then Henry came by, hissing as usual. Chee! Went Percy. Henry jumped and ran back to the shed. How beautifully you wheeshed him, laughed Edward. I can't wheesh like that. Oh, said Percy, that's nothing. You should hear them in the workshop. You have to wheesh loudly to make yourself heard. Next morning, Thomas arrived. The Fat Controller sent for me. I expect he wants help, he said to Edward. Shh, here he comes, replied Edward. Well done, Thomas. You've been quick. Listen, Henry, Gordon and James are sulking. They say they won't shunt like common tank engines. So I have shut them up and I want you both to run the line for a while. Common tank engines indeed, snorted Thomas. We'll show them. And Percy will help too. Oh, sir, yes, sir. Please, sir, answered Percy. Edward and Thomas worked the main line, greeting each other as they passed by. Percy puffed along the branch line. Thomas was anxious about Annie and Clara, but both driver and guard promised to take care of them. There were fewer trains, but the passengers didn't mind. They knew the 3 other engines were having a lesson. Gordon, James and Henry were cold, lonely and miserable. They wished now they hadn't been so silly.
Thanks. We got a spy.
Henry, James and Gordon were miserable. They had been shut up for several days for being naughty and longed to be let out again. At last the Fat Controller arrived. I hope you are sorry, he said, and understand that you are not so important after all. We have a new tank engine called Percy who helps pull coaches, and Thomas and Edward have worked the main line nicely. But I will let you out now if you promise to be good. Yes, sir, said the 3 engines, we will.
Dispatcher going up.
That's right, but please remember that this no shunting nonsense must stop.
Teleporter coming right up.
He then told Percy, Edward and Thomas that they could go and play on the branch line for a few days. And they ran off happily to find Annie and Clarabelle at the junction. The 2 coaches were so pleased to see Thomas again. Edward and Percy played with trucks. Stop, 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 screamed the trucks as they were pushed into their proper sidings. But the 2 engines laughed and went on shunting till the trucks were tidily arranged. Next, Edward took some empty trucks to the quarry. Percy was left alone. He didn't mind that a bit. He liked watching trains and being cheeky to the other engines. Hurry, 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 he would call, and they got very cross. After a great deal of shunting, Percy was waiting for the signalman to set the point so that he could get back to the yard. He was eager to work, but was being rather careless and not paying attention. Edward had warned Percy, be careful on the main line, whistle to the signalman you are there. But Percy didn't remember to whistle, so the busy signalman forgot him. Percy waited and waited. The points were still against him, so he couldn't move. Then he looked along the main line. He whistled in horror, for rushing straight towards him was Gordon with the express. Oh, groaned Gordon. Get out of my way! Percy opened his eyes. Gordon had stopped with Percy's buffers a few inches from his own. But Percy had begun to move. I won't stay here. I'll run away, he puffed. He went straight through Edward's station and was so frightened that he ran right up Gordon's hill without stopping. After that, he was tired, but he couldn't stop. He had no driver to shut off steam and apply the brakes. I want to stop, he puffed. The man in the signal box saw Percy was in trouble, so kindly set the points. Percy puffed wearily onto a nice empty siding, ending in a big bank of earth. He was too tired now to care where he went. I want to stop. I want to stop. I have stopped, he puffed thankfully. Never mind, Percy, said the workman as they dug him out. You shall have a drink and some coal, and then you'll feel better. Presently, Gordon arrived. Well done, Percy. You started so quickly that you stopped a nasty accident. I'm sorry I was cheeky, said Percy. You were clever to stop. Then Gordon helped pull Percy out from the bank. Percy is still cheeky because he is that sort of engine, but he's always most careful when he goes on the main line. One morning, Henry was feeling very sorry for himself. Sometimes he could pull trains, but sometimes he felt he had no strength at all. I suffered dreadfully, and no one cares. Rubbish, Henry, snorted James. You don't work hard enough. The Fat Controller spoke to him too. You're too expensive, Henry. You had lots of new parts and new paint too, but they've done you no good. If we can't make you better, we must get another engine instead of you. This made Henry, his driver and his fireman very sad. The Fat Controller was waiting when Henry came to the platform. He had taken off his hat and coat and put on overalls. Henry managed to start, but his fireman was not satisfied. Henry is a bad steamer, he said to the Fat Controller. I build up his fire, but it doesn't give enough heat. Henry tried very hard, but it was no good. He didn't have enough steam and came to a stop outside Edward's station. Oh dear, thought Henry, I shall have to go away. Oh dear, oh dear. All he could do was to go slowly onto a siding, and Edward took charge of the train. The Fat Controller and fireman went on discussing Henry's troubles. What do you think is wrong, fireman? Asked the Fat Controller. Excuse me, sir, he answered, but the fact is the coal is wrong. We've had a poor lot lately, and today it's worse. The other engines can manage, they have big fireboxes. Henry's is small and can't make the heat. With Welsh coal, he'd be a different engine. It's expensive, said the Fat Controller, but Henry must have a fair chance. James shall go and fetch some. When the Welsh coal came, Henry's driver and fireman were excited. Now we'll show them, Henry, old fellow. They carefully made his fire, putting large lumps of coal like a wall round the outside. Then the glowing middle part was covered with smaller lumps. You're spoiling my fire, complained Henry. Wait and see, said the fireman. We'll have a roaring fire, just when we want it. The fireman was right. When Henry reached the platform, the water was boiling nicely, and he had to let off steam. How are you, Henry? Peep, peep, whistled Henry. I feel Fine. Have you a good fire, driver? Never better, sir, and plenty of steam. No record breaking, warned the Fat Controller. Don't push him too hard. Henry won't need pushing, sir. I'll have to hold him back. Henry had a lovely day. He had never felt so well in his life. He wanted to go fast, but his driver wouldn't let him. Steady, old fellow, he would say. There's plenty of time. They arrived early at the station. Thomas puffed in. Where have you been, lazy bones? Asked Henry. Oh, I can't wait for dawdling tank engines like you. Goodbye. Whoosh, said Thomas to Annie and Clarabelle. Have you ever seen anything like it? Both Annie and Clarabelle agreed that they never had. Gordon was cross. Why should Henry have a new shape, he grumbled. A shape good enough for me is good enough for him. He goes gallivanting off the crew, leaving us to do his work, and comes back saying how happy he feels. It's disgraceful. And there's another thing. Henry whistles too much. No respectable engine ever whistles loudly at stations. It isn't wrong, but we just don't do it. Poor Henry didn't feel happy anymore. Never mind, whispered Percy. I'm glad you're home again. I like your whistling. Goodbye, Henry, called Gordon. We're glad to have you with us again, but remember what I said. Later, Henry stopped at Edward's station. Hello, Henry, said Edward. You look splendid. I was pleased to hear your happy whistle yesterday. Thank you, Edward, smiled Henry. Shh, shh. Can you hear something? It sounds like Gordon, said Edward, and it ought to be Gordon. But Gordon never whistles like that. It was Gordon. He came rushing down the hill at a tremendous rate. He didn't look at Henry, and he didn't look at Edward. He screamed straight through the station and disappeared. Well, said Edward. It isn't wrong, chuckled Henry, but we just don't do it. And he told Edward what Gordon had said. Meanwhile, Gordon screeched along the line. The noise was awful. At the station, everyone held their ears. The Fat Controller held his ears too. Take him away, he bellowed, and stop that noise! Gordon puffed sadly away, but he wouldn't stop whistling until two fitters climbed up and knocked his whistle valve in place. That night, Gordon slunk into the shed. He was glad it was empty. It isn't wrong, murmured Henry to no one in particular, but we just don't do it. No one mentioned whistles. Next morning, Henry was enjoying himself enormously. I feel so well, he sang. Trickety-trot, hummed his coaches. Then he saw some boys on a bridge. Peep, peep, hello, he whistled. Oh, he called. The boys didn't wave and take his number. They thought it fun to drop stones on him instead. They've broken our glass. They've broken our glass, sobbed the coaches.
We got him, we got him.
The passengers weren't hurt, but they were cross. Call the police. No, said the driver. Leave it to Henry and me. What will you do, they asked. Can you keep a secret? Yes, yes. Well then, said the driver. Henry is going to sneeze at those boys.
Way to go, Pally. Move it up. Thanks, Pally.
Lots of people were waiting at the station just before the bridge. They wanted to see what would happen.
Scout's a spy.
Henry has plenty of ashes, said the driver. Please keep all windows shut till we have passed the bridge. Henry is as excited as we are, aren't you, old fellow? Henry was feeling stuffed up. Soon they could see the boys, and they all had stones. Are you ready, Henry, said his driver. Sneeze hard when I tell you. Now, he said. Achoo, shoot! Well done, Henry, laughed his driver.
Way to go, slugger. Yeah.
Henry went home very pleased with himself. He had taught Gordon and silly boys a lesson with a whistle and a sneeze.
We got him.
Toby is a tram engine. He has cow catchers and side plates and doesn't look like a steam engine at all. He takes trucks from farms and villages to the main line and is cheerful to everyone he meets. He has a coach called Henrietta, who has seen better days. It's not fair at all, she grumbles, remembering that she used to be full and 9 trucks would rattle behind her. Now there are only 3 or 4. The farms and factories send their goods mostly by lorry. Toby is always careful. Cars, buses and lorries often have accidents. Toby hasn't had an accident for years. The buses are crowded and Henrietta is empty. A lady and a stout gentleman stood on Toby's platform. He was, of course, the Fat Controller, but Toby didn't know this yet. Come on, Grandfather, cried the children. Do look at this engine. That's a tram engine, Stephen, said the Fat Controller. Is it electric? Asked Bridget. Whoosh! Hissed Toby. Shh, shh, said her brother. You've offended him. But trams are electric, aren't they? They are mostly, but this is a steam tram. May we go in it, Grandfather? Please? Stop, said the Fat Controller to the guard. They all scrambled into Henrietta. Hip, hip, hooray, chanted Henrietta. But Toby did not sing. Electric indeed. Electric indeed, he snorted. He was very hurt. What is your name? Asked the Fat Controller. Toby, sir. Thank you, Toby, for a very nice ride. Thank you, sir, said Toby. He felt better now. This gentleman, he thought, is a gentleman who knows how to speak to engines. The children came every day for a fortnight. Sometimes they rode with the guard, sometimes in empty trucks. On the last day of all, the driver invited them into his cab. All were sorry when they had to go away. And the Fat Controller and his family thanked everyone. Come again soon, replied Toby. We will, called the children. And they waved till Toby was out of sight.
Spy!
The months passed. Toby had few trucks and fewer passengers.
Yeah, thanks.
Our last day, Toby, said his driver one morning. The manager says we must close tomorrow. That day, everyone wanted the chance of a last ride. The passengers joked and sang, but Toby and his driver wished they wouldn't.
Thanks, Pally.
Goodbye, Toby, said the passengers afterwards. We are sorry your line is closing down. So am I, said Toby. Nobody wants me. Toby thought, and went unhappily to sleep. Next morning, the shed was flung open, and he woke with a start to see his driver waving a piece of paper. "Wake up, Toby," they shouted, "and listen to this. It's a letter from the stout gentleman." Toby listened then. But I mustn't tell you any more, or I shall spoil the next story. There's a line to a quarry at the end of Thomas's branch. It goes for some distance along the road. Thomas was always very careful to whistle here, in case anyone was coming. Early one morning, a large policeman was sitting close to the line. Thomas liked policemen. He had been a great friend of the constable who had just retired. Peep, peep, he whistled, "Good morning." Thomas expected that the new constable would be friendly too, but was sorry to see that he didn't look friendly at all. He was red in the face and very cross. "Disgraceful," he spluttered. "I didn't sleep a wink last night. It was so quiet, and now engines come whistling suddenly behind me." "I'm sorry, sir," said Thomas. "I only said good morning." The policeman pointed to Thomas.
Thanks,
"Where's your cowcatcher?" he asked. "But I don't catch cows, sir." "Don't be funny," snapped the policeman. He looked at Thomas's wheels